Thank you, Congressman Lucas, for joining us from your district office in Oklahoma. Congressman Lucas is the longest serving House Republican on the Financial Services Committee. He's also the chair of its Monetary Policy Task Force. Thanks again for taking the time.
Absolutely, Eleanor. Good to be with you, and kind of during a very interesting period of time these days.
Yeah, seems safe to say. So first off, this category of our event is energy themed. You wrote an editorial last year about why the SEC should not require companies to disclose climate-related information. The Trump administration has obviously since abandoned that rule. Are there other energy-related regulations that you'd like to see Treasury Secretary Bessent take more control over as part of his effort?
I want to make sure that we have the ability to have access to the capital markets to fund energy projects. My district in Oklahoma is traditional oil and gas. We're also wind and solar. We may not have the potential for hydroelectric power, but we have a great capacity to do things, and I want to make sure that the resources are there. One of the great challenges of the Biden administration was they spent a lot of time on social policy. They spent a lot of time on environmental policy, and those kind of things don't help facilitate the market flow. They make it more complicated. So I was pleased to see the SEC withdraw their proposal. The former chairman of the Securities Exchange Commission and I, Mr. Gensler, had a long history. When I was chairman of the Ag Committee, he was chairman of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. So our, shall we say, philosophical disagreements go back a long, long ways. But we're on the right track, and that is a very positive statement about the Trump administration. They're realistic about a number of these rules.
So they've also said that they want to oversee the Fed's supervisory regulations. Do you think that that's a good idea for the White House to have a power over how the Fed supervises banks?
Well, an independent Fed is a very important institution, and that debate, I personally believe, was settled in 1913 with the creation of the Act. And by the way, the Federal Reserve System is not owned by the federal government. It is owned by the banks, another issue that was clearly decided in 1913 in the original Act. So on the task force that Chairman Hill created as we began this session of Congress and gave me the opportunity and the responsibility to chair, that's one of the things, along with capital markets, with treasury markets, that we're looking at is the independence of the Fed. Now, some will say that this, Eleanor, is a very difficult environment to legislate in. You have a bare Republican majority in the House, a bare Republican majority in the Senate. You have all of the other things going on in the world and here at home. But I would suggest, if my Democrat colleagues agree with me, that reinforcing the Fed's independence is a critically important issue, then I think we can achieve an understanding there legislatively. By the same token, my Republican colleagues are very sensitive. They don't believe the decisions going all the way back to Dodd-Frank, and especially in the Biden administration, of having the Fed become a social policy, an environmental policy enforcer. That's outside of the scope of the Federal Reserve System. So there's a window here to make corrections and get us back on the original mission, but it's going to require some bipartisan effort, and I think that's probably one of the reasons the chairman asked me to take this on.
What specifically might that bipartisan legislation safeguarding the Fed's independence look like?
Well, remember, the Fed leadership is appointed by or nominated by the president, confirmed by the United States Senate. I think that's still a solid foundation, and that gives this president and future presidents the ability to influence policy by the people they nominate. But stepping away from the supervisory roles, especially on non-safety and soundness issues, yes, the Fed has a responsibility to make sure that their member banks and the institutions that use their services are run in a responsible, compliant, sound fashion. But there's a difference between being a good banker and being a banker who's told what kind of loans you can or cannot make in the energy sector, being told what kind of businesses you can support based on how they conduct their business activities internally. I think we can clearly define and step away from it. There are provisions of Dodd-Frank that we're looking at. But at this stage, in all fairness, Eleanor, we've had the preliminary opening hearing of the committee looking at the Fed, kind of a historic, bring everybody up to speed. We've had a second hearing looking at the Treasury market situation, bringing people up to speed. Our next hearing will be on the Treasury market side, looking at the liquidity of the markets, very important issue in recent weeks, and we'll also continue with greater discussions on the mechanics of the Fed. So I'm an old school legislator. I think this process will take us to places that we might be surprised by and may give us opportunities to make long-term changes. But my challenge, too, in the world we're in now, this instant gratification society we live in, we need to look at these rules, these laws, as though not just what will happen in the Trump administration, but the next 2 or 3 or 5 or 50 years from now administrations. And that requires a little bit of reset in the mindset of some of my colleagues.
Speaking of instant gratification, I mean, you're not having these conversations in a vacuum. The president posted on Truth Social on Monday that Powell was Mr. Too Late, a major loser for not lowering interest rates. I mean, what was your first reaction when you saw that post?
Well, the president's a very energetic, dynamic fella. He says exactly what he thinks, when he thinks it, as he thinks it. But he also is a pragmatic guy in that he will make adjustments, just as we saw more recently the comments about no, Mr. Powell should in effect stay or will stay in his role as chairman of the Federal Reserve. So the president makes adjustments, and sometimes, whether you're the executive branch or the legislative branch, the markets will drive that. And watching what's going on in the stock market for weeks now, watching what's going on in the bond markets, how we're moving all that $35 trillion in paper that the Treasury has to issue to make the government function, the president's, I responded, and I respect that greatly. But also remember, Eleanor, as you and I discussed before, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board is the chairman, but he has a very bright, dynamic, energetic board with him. And those decisions are not exclusively made by the chairman, both historically and in the present time. It's the whole board. So even if you were to change out a chairman, you still have a board. And I've spent enough time around the board of the Federal Reserve to know that these are dynamic, energetic, bright, strong-willed individuals. And that's probably a good thing.
Obviously, the Supreme Court has a say here, too. You know, they're expected to rule soon on Humphrey's executor, which is the legal precedent that prevents the president from firing the heads of independent agencies. I mean, do you think we'll see that ruling to have a carve-out for the Federal Reserve when we get it?
I think the 1913 law, as I read it, is very tightly written. And just because other entities might be subject to a Supreme Court ruling, I'm not so certain that it would apply to the chairman of the Federal Reserve. But we will discuss those issues in the task force hearings in the coming days and probably get down to the nitty-gritty. And I promise you, whether it's myself or my ranking member, Mr. Vargas, or the chairman, Mr. Hill, or the ranking member, Mrs. Waters, who also serve on the task force, there's a diversity of opinion. And we're kind of an intense group, too, just like the Federal Reserve Board.
Yeah, certainly. Been to enough 1 a.m. markups in Rayburn to attest to that. So you mentioned, the upcoming hearing on Treasury markets. We saw a rush to sell off Treasury bonds after Trump announced his new tariffs that caused yields to skyrocket. You said in a post on X at the time that should provoke meaningful discussions about Treasury market structure and reform. I mean, what do you see that reform looking like at this point?
Well, first off, remember, in the last 35 years, we've literally increased the amount of paper that the Fed or the Treasury is selling into the markets by 8 times. And as a result of Dodd-Frank and a number of other actions, the number of what I would refer to as primary market makers has gone from 40-something to 20-something. So we're moving 8 times as much paper, but yet we have half the principal dealers who are managing that flow. That I'm very concerned about, and we need to look at the task force about what were the decisions made that got us to the point where financial institutions don't want to participate. And it's not just the primary market dealers, it's the SLR requirements and the ESLR requirements where we made it more difficult for all financial institutions to hold Treasury debt. Looking at all of those kind of things as an example of the sort of stuff that we need to address. Now, the tariff issue, which has caused so much of the rumble. I'm in an agricultural district, an energy district in Oklahoma. We sell 85% of our cotton into the world market. 40% of our wheat goes into the world market. Virtually every hog in northwest Oklahoma goes to Asia to be consumed. We sit on an ocean of natural gas in my district in Oklahoma. We need to have the opportunity to sell that product, to ship it around the world, to help our friends meet their needs on a day-to-day basis. So the tariffs are very important to my people. But I would acknowledge, as my constituents would in Oklahoma, the trading practices of the last 40 years have not been fair to us. And I see why the president wants to reset the deck. He's right in that regard. But if it took us 40 years to get to this mess, it's going to take a little bit to get back from it. And I think the president understands that. But he is a man of action. Oh, my goodness.
He certainly is. So obviously we're back to the Hill next week, whether we want to or not. And committees are slated to start voting on their own respective portions of Trump's tax agenda. What do you expect House Financial Services to advance as its portion of that package? They're directed to find $1 billion in savings. You know, the CFPB has been floated. What can we expect?
I think you'll see a number of savings achieved in the reduction of the staffing and the capacity of the various regulators. Every Republican, well, almost every Republican, is pledged to undo the CFPB. Every Republican is pledged to, or at least almost every Republican, to step the Fed back from the responsibilities dumped on them. There'll be savings. In the overall scheme of things, where we're trying to save, $1.5 trillion, where Energy and Commerce has to save $880 billion and the Ag Committee $230 billion, it's a small amount of money. But I think the people who will be affected by the changes that are a part of these resource savings processes will find it to be a positive experience. If you believe in the market, then having less interference from the federal government, which should consequently mean a little more stability and certainty, I think this will be not just an exercise, this will be a great effort on our part in the Financial Services Committee. And my friends in the political minority may not share every point of view and may not vote for any of it, but deep down inside, they're going to know it's the right thing.
Can we expect savings at regulators other than the CFPB?
I would say at this point in time, until we get to markup, I'm not completely certain as to what the chairman will offer, and my fellow, since I'm a task force chairman, my fellow subcommittee chairman in their fields of responsibility. We'll get to that number, and we'll do it in a responsible way. And it won't surprise anybody, I suspect. This should be more of a low-hanging fruit kind of an exercise. I'm hoping.
So speaking of reconciliation, we saw some Republicans weigh whether to reduce their federal share of the Medicaid expansion. I mean, is that something that you'd be on board for with Oklahoma?
I think that reforming Medicaid, which is the program that applies to people under 65 below a certain income level, is probably one of the necessities because it's just out of control. Now, there are a lot of unique issues in various states. In Oklahoma, we are one of, I think, 3 states where out-of-state entities came in and used the initiative petition process to bring a vote of the people and basically say in our state constitution that if the Fed portion of spending is reduced, and sometimes that's as much as 90% in certain states, that the state will automatically pick that up. At the time this passed, I don't think my state leadership really thought through what the potential impact was going to be. But in the case of Oklahoma, if the E&C Committee, Energy and Commerce, I should say, achieve their $880 billion in savings, a big chunk of that has to come out of Medicaid. And in Oklahoma, as an example, the state will be compelled to pick up what the federal government has not paid for. Now, when Uncle Sam was paying for 90%, it was awfully easy on the state level to be very enthusiastic about these programs. But if they have to put skin in the game, and not just Oklahoma, but across the country, it's going to be a fascinating process, not just reconciliation, but implementation. Get ready for some real excitement out on the state level. And I believe in state and local government. I have faith my friends in the legislature and my governor in Oklahoma will do the right thing. We'll just see what the right thing is.
Well, like I said, I mean, you are the longest serving Republican on House Financial Services. Do you expect to stick around past this Congress?
I think I have an obligation to my constituents to stay through the Trump experience, and we'll see where the world takes us in the next administration. This is a 2-year term, and the good folks back home have the ability to change their mind every 24 months. But by my tenure and my focus, I'd like to think I've been a good reflection of the people of the 3rd District of Oklahoma, and that they will give me the chance to continue to work through these issues. Someday, we're going to have a large enough Republican majority to be functional, not to have to do things through reconciliation, because as you and I again have discussed before, Eleanor, with anywhere from a 1 to a 4-seat majority in the House, a 3-seat majority in the Senate, conventional legislating is extremely difficult, and many of the big issues are going to go not just the budget savings for tax relief and border security and all those things through this first reconciliation bill, but many things are going to have to go through reconciliation, whether it's 1, 2, or 3 reconciliation bills in this calendar year. And I know anyone who's aware of reconciliation is just taking a deep breath, but the hard stuff will probably pass in that fashion. I'd like to get to the other side when we can go back to normal legislating. I believe in regular legislative order.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Congressman. That's all the time we've got today, but thank you, everyone in the audience, for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your recess.
Thank you, Eleanor.